Hi, welcome to Sage's Paint the Masters series. I'm Jenny Worker and I'm going to lead you through a very famous painting. It's Georgia O'Keeffe's Red Poppy, and I just pulled this up on my iPad. You can do the same on a tablet that you might have, and you can print it off or get a copy of it wherever you want. We're going to try and paint this together. It should be fun. It's a fairly easy image to reproduce. And so most of it's about having fun together and using the materials that you have on hand, making it easy and inexpensive, and just enjoying being part of somebody else's art. You learn a lot as you walk through the footsteps of another artist. As you start to copy their image, you find how they paint, why they make the choices they made. It's kind of fun. It's a different way to learn. You'll learn a lot about yourself, and you'll also learn a lot about what she was thinking about. There's a great quote that she had where she talks about the flowers and why she paints them, and she says, I look at flowers and they're so small, I wanted to stop even a busy New Yorker and make them see these small things the way I see them. So she painted them really big and just focused in on just the flower itself. And she's called the mother of American abstraction because of how she abstracted flowers. And her images are so familiar that today we take them for granted and we don't see how unusual they were. If you think about a traditional flower still life, it would have looked incredibly different. What somebody in 1927, when she painted these paintings, might have thought of as a traditional portrait of flowers might have looked entirely different and more sort of typical, where you sort of see flowers set in a scene rather than the flowers be exclusively the subject themselves. So it'll be kind of fun today. Use any materials you have on hand. I'm going to use a 16 by 20 pre-stretched canvas. They're pretty inexpensive to get at any hobby shop, but you could use anything. You could use the back of a pad of paper, or you could...
For paint, just use what you have available. You'll need red, yellow, and blue, the primaries, and black and white. You'll also need a jar of water and some brushes, preferably flat ones and fairly large. You'll need a palette knife, or you can just use a plastic knife that you have, a paper towel, and for the palette, you can just use a paper plate or the back of a pad of paper. That will make cleanup very easy.
So I'm going to begin by bisecting my canvas, and I don't have to use a ruler or anything. I can easily find the exact center of that by taking a piece of paper and simply folding it in half. But the problem is that my paper is too small. It's smaller than my canvas. So I'm going to just take two pieces of paper. These just happen to be tracing paper. Just regular paper is fine. And I'm going to tape them together so that my paper is larger. Right. And I'm going to mark on my paper the height of my canvas. And then I'm going to fold this in half, and that will help me find exact center. That is exact center. I'll put a little mark very lightly on my canvas edge. It's not being super exact because it really doesn't matter. This is for us, for having fun. So I've got this I bisected earlier, and I've got this up on my screen. You could print it off, whatever works for you. And I'm going to be just sort of roughly laying a few things in. I'm going to imagine that there's a cross, but I'm not going to draw it because that would really interrupt the painting of it. And if I visualize the cross on here, I'm going to ask some simple questions like, is the center of the flower exactly halfway, or is it a little bit above, or is it a little bit below halfway? And if you look at it, it is hovering, it crosses the halfway mark, but it hovers a little bit below the halfway mark. Crosses it, but it hovers below. And you can actually see the shape under my pencil there is a triangle with its point headed downward, like an upside down witch's hat. And it's very close to dead center. So if we look at that, I'm just laying my pencil down dead center. Even the point of the upside down witch's hat crosses the central line. So I'm going to reflect that on my canvas. Doesn't have to be exact, but here's, I'll let a little bit of that run above halfway and a little bit of it sink below halfway. And again, I'm keeping my lines very light. You may or may not even be able to see them, but I can see them. As long as you can see them, that's the important part. So let's just get this very lightly drawn out for starters. And I'm going to next look at where some of the big movements happen. So we have this big brush of a flower. Well, where is its apex? Where is its highest point? It's hitting about there at its highest point. And how close is that? Is that dead center? Whoops, if you touch an iPad, you get all kinds of things. So here's my center line. It's just a little bit to the left of center. So I'll let that, and it kisses the edge. It doesn't touch the edge of the canvas, it gets very close to it. Just barely kisses the edge of that. And how far does that arc go? Does it go all the way out to the edge? Does it go all the way over there? Look at that and think about that. So it's ending about here, give or take. Let me prop this up so you can see this at the same time. So it's ending about here, give or take. We'll just kind of let that arc come in, and this finish it up over there, and think about where is that hitting there. And then you've got a vertical line, not vertical, but a straight line. It's on a diagonal. Is it a 45-degree angle? Not quite, it's a little steeper than a 45-degree angle. So I'll allow that to sort of come out here. And again, it gets really close and it kisses the edge of the canvas, doesn't go off, but gets relatively close. And then we have some little ruffles of petals, and we don't have to get all of these exact like she has them. I will let these two lines be parallel because I see that they are fairly parallel there. But then these ruffles here, I'm going to just wiggle my pencil and approximate where they go. But what I'm going to look at is, where do they hit over here? Are they wiggling along and hitting down here? No. Are they over here? No. Give or take, they're hitting about here. So I'm going to let that sort of wiggle along, and actually they stop here and another petal comes out from behind and kind of continues the wiggle. This line comes and it reaches down and it scoops down underneath that central bud. So we'll let that sort of scoop down quite low here. Another huge movement is this foreshortened petal. You see how that petal reaches out towards you, like the arm. If the arm is stretched, it's quite long, but when it reaches towards you and becomes foreshortened, it's very narrow. It's almost, if it was a pencil, it would just be a circle for the end, the butt end of the pencil. And so that leaf coming out towards you is very foreshortened. And let's just see it flatly. So instead of trying to draw something we can't draw in three dimensions. We can't draw in 3 dimensions. We're working on a flat surface. The only thing we can do is draw in 2 dimensions. So when we look at this, the work has already been done. She had to translate it from a 3-dimensional flower to a 2-dimensional drawing. We can just copy what we see on the drawing. So I'm going to ask flat questions such as, where does this begin and where does it end? And what is the angle that it begins at? So it comes up at about a 45-degree angle on this side, and then it turns into a very horizontal line. So I'm going to try to, that should be fairly easy to copy. Okay. Starts down about here again, and we're going to go on and it's a fairly straight 45-degree angle, and then here it's very flat, and then it sort of ends about there. Now the underside of the petal is more wiggly and interesting. So we'll find those more organic shapes. Got a little bit of a loop-de-loop there, and a little more loop-de-loops here, and then it comes up and it gets very narrow. And this doesn't have to be exact, but I'll give it a little drop down right here. I'm going to emphasize that little drop down, and that is not dead center. So I'll let that be a little off center. Right about here. And sort of swoopy swoops over there. How about we do the underside of that petal now? It's this lovely little cradle that's holding it up. It's a U shape with a unique form over here. So we'll let that just be a simple U, fairly dead center. And over here we get that sort of little variation right at the edge. The stem coming out of the dead center. We'll just, and I might even check. So I'm going to double check. It's actually a little bit to the right of center. So that'll give this a little variation. If everything is too dead center, you might pick up on that. There's a little bit of leaf sticking out here. This side comes very close, and it actually does run off the canvas here. So we have, if I look at the negative space, I see this little triangular corner in the bottom left. So I'll make sure I have that little triangular corner for my negative space over here. And that helps me, the blank space of the corner helps me find where to draw that leaf. And then it comes out, try to sort of approximate this point here. Just a little wiggle there. Don't have to take all day for that. I'm going to finish the leaf we began with. And that's going to run down to about here with a lovely little scallop, little curve there. Now here, this is a little trickier because this is the fold as that leaf bends in. So right here, this moment is a hard moment to draw, but it's already been drawn, so we can truly just copy what she's done there. So there's a breaking point here where these two, where this line and this line come out all out from the same place. And this sort of runs down. There's a finger that jots out just a bit, and then it just wiggles its way around the black center. Let's tackle this leaf here, coming out from the center. And we want to think about how it's interacting with the rest of the flower. Actually, I'm changing my mind, which is fine. I want to draw this first because as I'm coming up here, I'm not sure where this is going to go until I've drawn this. So I'm going to draw this little piece here. And that's going to be sort of, there's a shadow that's coming off of it, hitting about here. And this is bulging in front of those other things, comes out to about there. And then that can allow me to find where this little guy sits in there, a little shorter than I was going with it at first. This comes out, there's a little moment. These two almost touch. It's a lovely little moment. Just a beautiful moment where they almost touch, but not quite. And then this is a big swoop falling back in. Flows right back in to the center. So I'm actually stopping to look at where it's going to hit before I make the mark. Sort of finding where it's going to hit, and that makes it easier to connect the 2 points. That's sort of all. There's a few other things. There's I don't want to block what, so you can see there's a little horizontal line coming out here. I'm letting it float upward just a hair. I see that in the picture, and it has a little thumb there, a little dark, and this is dark. I'm going to mark that so I can see that. And there's a little blackness right here. We'll just allow a little piece of information there. And that's sort of all I think that I need to do to get started with this. So I'm going to begin by laying out my palette, and it's always important to keep your palette in an organized fashion, even if you're using the back of an old pad of paper. So I'm going to begin mixing the colors, and the main color in this painting is orange. So I'm just going to start mixing orange. And this is a primary magenta. It looks very pink, but it actually starts to turn red when you start mixing it. And I'm going to try to mix enough quantity that I can really use it while I'm painting and not have to stop and remix. So I'm going to start by mixing the orange. And if I look at it, there's a few different kinds of orange. There's this lighter orange, and then it even subtly shifts and it works its way down to much darker. And it's basically all out of the same color. So I'm going to mix some of the lighter areas, and you might think to just throw white in to mix the lighter areas, but if you only throw white in, you can get a very pastel color. It's very similar, but it loses an aspect of the luminosity. So to make the lighter colors, I'm going to add white, yes, but I'm also going to add a little bit of yellow, and hopefully that will keep some of the punch that we see going on in her colors, because they almost seem to glow. So you could take a little time to mix up your colors. So to make some of my darker color, I added some more of the magenta, and it looks really pink on my palette, but when I hold it up, it's actually not that bad. It's pretty close. It's good enough for government work. And the thing is about a primary color is you really can't mix a primary. You have to use the primary you have on hand, and if it's slightly different than the one you're trying to match, so be it. We'll just, use that for our painting. And that is why on my own personal palette, I'll have different reds, different blues, different yellows, because you can't mix those. You have to sort of just start with them. So the black and the white are fairly easy because I have black, but if I just use this out of the tube black, it's gonna work in some places, but some places it might just be sort of deathly. So I'm going to, and especially areas like this where it's mixed in with other colors to neutralize it a little bit, make that sort of brown, that very warm brown in the center. Down here it goes a little green. So I'm gonna allow that to mix a little bit with some of the other colors to sort of give it a naturalistic feel. So I'm gonna mix it with a little bit of my red. What happens, I have got some green areas, so what if I take a little yellow, a little yellow and a little blue, and that I might use down there. And if I'm so spend time mixing, and then the white, is it a pure white? I doubt it. Let's see if it is. I'm going to hold my white up next to it. It is not a pure white, right? It has a lot of coolness to it, a little bit of blue. So I'm going to make my white with a little bit of blue in it. Right, so now's the fun part. We've done all the hard work. We've laid out the drawing, the paints. We're ready to go. We're ready to just jump in and start painting and have fun. So when I look at the painting, some of the things that I see is there's a certain amount of confidence to it. So I'm going to try to get that confidence on the painting by putting things down in one shot. And if they're not perfect, it's almost better if I leave it than if I sit and fuss too much. A lot of the movements in the painting are very big and very bold, so I'm actually picking out some larger brushes. And I'm going to start with some of the lighter colors and then add the dark in later, because I don't want to have black down here and then take my orange and smear it through the black and carry the black with it. So I'm going to start by using some of my lighter orange-red color. I'm going to start with some red and drag it through. See how it goes, and that's almost a darker area. The thing about acrylic, sometimes it almost feels like I'm working in watercolor because it's very, very thin and it's showing the white canvas through it. And I might just use that. I might use that to my advantage because that's sort of how acrylics work. So I'm going to be a little bit conscious of my brush strokes as I'm working here. And I'm actually using a little darker of a color than I thought I would, because the lighter one that I mixed up wasn't really working out. There's a little darker area here. I'm going to dip into some of my darker reds to show some of these darker areas here. And I have to do it very quickly. I feel if I don't do it quickly, it won't feel the way hers felt. So all of my work at the beginning was really important because it's allowing me to work a little faster now. I dip into some of the darkers to allow some of these I'm just sort of looking at where I was on her drawing. This is a little darker here. here behind that leaf to pop the front leaf forward. So it's really a game of value. These are all about the same color. But this comes forward because that's dark there behind. Same thing here, I'll show you here. This will come forward here once this is put in dark behind. And this is actually one of those moments where it's really dark. So I might even dip into the darks that I made on the other side. There's the even darker dark. And that'll help it to pop forward. And that edge there, I can be sloppy on some edges, but that's a really important edge. I want to make sure that I sort of slow down for that one. And I don't want to leave any gaps of white here, so right, there's a gap right there for the moment. Come over here with this darkness there, and I want to make sure that this is darker than the leaf in front. And then here, this is where I don't want to leave any gaps of color. So that's color to color, color to color. You don't want any white showing. You'll have to do something with later. You do not want that at all. This is going to go off the page there. And while I've got this going, see how there's this wonderful movement here in here. I want to use the direction of my brush to emphasize that. And I'm going to come back into that here in a minute. First, I'm going to get some of this going here. And let there be some of these lovely little movements of the light coming in there. So while I've got the reds out, I'm going to keep just going around with the reds and making some progress here. Oh, I didn't explain this. I have 3 separate brushes for some of the different colors. That really helps save me some time so that I don't have to keep washing brushes while I'm working. So here we come in with the light color, and everywhere she's very intentionally, everywhere there's a light, there's dark underneath to push it forward. So I see this is light here, and that's making me notice that underneath it was a little bit of that much darker red color. So get a little of that over here, and just right on that edge. That's each time she does that, that's how she shows it. It's a value switch. And then on top of that lighter color, I'm actually going to bring this a little higher than my drawing had it. Really feel it a little higher than I drew it with pencil. And smooth those together. Because this dark across the top, my brushes are starting to dry out a little. Keep having to add more and more water. This, and it sort of has a little drop in one place. That's narrower than it ended up being, so I needed to give it some place to be narrower. You can make changes as you need to as you go along. So this has to touch that, so I'm going to make sure it comes up and touches. And what's going on there? Well, it's darker behind here, so I'm going to let this, it's just a game of dark to light, light to dark. Let's keep working the oranges, or we could put this black in. Let's put the black in, that'll be sort of fun. So we sort of have like a little flower, a little drawn flower with a center and then some just sort of like swoopy leaves of the flower. I don't know what, it's a seed pod or something. And then around that there's all this hairy, really dark black stuff. And all of this is very precise. So I'm actually going to get out a smaller brush for some of this, and a different shape brush. I'm going to get out a round brush. I think that'll make it easier to draw those shapes. So I might first lay down that black. Get my brush a little bit wet, cut it off a little. And the black, I'm going to just shift the color ever so slightly, just adding some other colors around it so it's not just jet black, which just is awful to me. But I'm going to make sure I get rid of that white. Ultimately, just crisp edge as it flows along the leaf. It doesn't matter if it's the exact color or the exact shape and pattern of what she had going on there. What is more important is that I'm not leaving any white. And I think what might be easier for this is to paint the dark first, and then I'm going to put that little bud that I drew in earlier, put that on top. Now I'm going to add that little flower, and it's just a little circle, and then these little, I don't think it's a flower, I think it's a seed pod, I guess. Just these little arms that come out. So really what we're looking for is value shifts, because the color doesn't really change that much, so we're just kind of watching as it gets darker, as it gets lighter. It was better before, and when I went over and over and over, I lost that freshness. So there, I just tried to lay it in to see if I could regain the freshness. That's where I'm going to sit for the flower for now, and I'm going to fill in the rest of it so it's actually painted. So let's just start with the white for fun. And I mixed that up a while ago. I need a clean brush, so I'm going to wash really well, otherwise it's going to still have that red in it. And I will see how this lays in. Not so bad, but I think that adding this blue color is going to really help. It's a little stark white. So as I do this, I want to look at what I'm drawing, kind of help draw that leaf. So I'm looking back at the image to kind of redraw the edge there. I'm okay with it mixing with the white a little bit because it kind of looks to me like that's what she did. So I'll just let it mix a little bit, and then the other side of the stem, there's like two little lumps here, little pieces of green hanging down, and then this sort of comes in. What I always do when I feel like I'm almost done with a painting is I always stop and get back from it and look at it and see, did it do what I want it to do or not. So I'm going to do that with my painting, and you go ahead and do that with your painting. Get back from it, walk to the other side of the room, and really just look at it for a while and think about what it needs, if it needs anything. You can ruin a painting if you just keep working and noodling around and just keep going at it. You really can lose the freshness. So before you do that, pause and really be objective and look at it and see, what does it really need? Where does it need some more help? Or is it done? Or is it just one little place that needs a little help? Be really thoughtful about this. So when I stopped and got back and looked at my painting, where I decided I wanted to make my final changes were, I really can't see these little flowers in here from far away, so I want to work on that a little bit. And also the light areas of the painting where we have these big light coming through the leaves, mine don't feel very light. So I'm going to allow these to have a little more white, somehow lighten them up a little bit. So first I'm going to do the flower. So I need my light brush for that.
In 1887 in Wisconsin, Georgia O'Keeffe studied at the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League of New York. Her abstract charcoal drawings caught the eye of famous art dealer and photographer Alfred Stieglitz, who was the first to exhibit her work and eventually became her husband. In 1929, she made her first trip to New Mexico and fell in love with the desert landscape and the adobe architecture. Eventually, she made it her home. She passed in 1986 at the age of 98.